Happy Valentine's Day. You're gonna die alone. And not for lack of trying, but between apps that follow a pay-to-win structure and whatever the hell MILF Manor was, humanity barely understands what love even is, much less how to find it properly. And that's because in the last decade or so, there's been a level of gamification at play. I mean, just look at the show F-Boy Island. That was basically Among Us with the added benefit of sending toxic men to Guantanamo Bay. But regardless, if love really is a game, then the best method to understand it is through the only game any of us ever bothered to learn: Dungeons and Dragons. And I know you must be asking yourself, Hama, can I really find love using only Dungeons and Dragons? Absolutely not. But hopefully at the very least you'll understand your metaphorical character sheet before you go ruining the game for everyone else. But what even is a love language? Put simply, much in the way that you have a main in D&D, you also have a main in the way you like to express and receive love, whether that's through acts of service, gift giving, or physical touch. But saying I main physical touch will most likely put you on a watch list, so we're going to be contextualizing it through the lens of each individual player class. Which leaves us with just one question. What is your D&D love language? Contrary to what you might believe, having a rogue love language is not based solely around stabbing people for fun. In actuality, the player's handbook describes rogues as resourceful and versatile, a cornerstone of any successful adventuring party, and the same is true here. If you have a rogue love language, you express it by being reliable. You seek to prove the validity of your affections through practical means as opposed to words or gifts. And this can often manifest itself in a handful of ways. Whether it's remembering small details or taking a more active approach to household chores and tasks, your main method of communication is actions, not words. And that's because you're very solution-oriented, and to some that may come off as single-minded. But to you, problems are meant to be solved, not discussed. And that can often cause a bit of tension in your relationships when the other person just wants to feel heard. Because in some ways, your actions are meant to distract from your deep discomfort with introspection, and a desire to avoid the whys and hows. But ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away, and in all likelihood will probably make things worse. Which is why if you have a rogue love language, you should definitely work on your avoidant tendencies. After all, just because you can avoid an attack, it doesn't mean that the fight isn't still going on. With clerics, it's a different story. Clerics are often described as an intermediary between the mortal and the divine. And in that sense, people with cleric love languages are often best at identifying sore spots in a relationship through active communication. You express love through your compassion and understanding, acting as a support system for the people you love, giving them space when necessary, but remaining present in the relationship. However, this can often backfire as you forgo a lot of your own personal wants and needs in an attempt to help other people with their problems. Overall, though, clerics are some of the kindest and most patient people around, and the love they express, whether platonic or romantic, can often be very healing for the people that need it, which is why it's important to learn how to prioritize your own needs first before you attempt to help others. You can't cast if you don't have any spell slots left. Paladins are very rigid and unflinching when it comes to the way that they express love. If you have a paladin love language, it can often manifest through acts of service and a desire to put the relationship first. A good example of somebody with a paladin love language is Gomez Adams. And like Gomez Adams, you remain loyal and devoted to your partner, especially when things get hard. Due to your rigid moral code, there's often very little wiggle room for anxieties to manifest. And this can be great for people with anxious attachment styles because boundaries are always made clear and defined. However, with such little room for interpretation, paladins often have problems with compromise, so it's important to encourage them to keep an open mind. The wizard love language is more function over finesse. If you're a wizard, you have a very pragmatic grasp on love and its more cerebral elements. How someone feels can often be secondary to why they feel that way. And this can lead to a level of tension as often your partner will feel as though they're being studied. Let me explain. The main way you express your love is through your intellect. You enjoy sharing in your niche special interests, your epiphanies, your theories, and that's because feeling heard is what's most important to you. And it goes beyond this. To you, memorizing the minutia of your partner's existence can be what makes or breaks a relationship. Things like how they take their coffee in the morning or what their favorite shows are. Small things that can go unnoticed but are intrinsic to maintaining a healthy long-term relationship. However, this can also be exhausting for both parties, as people with wizard love languages are often very inquisitive by nature and will ask questions even if there isn't a clear answer. Which is why it's important to be patient and realize that some answers come with time as opposed to experimentation. Almost in complete contrast to people with wizard love languages are people with sorcerer love languages. These often manifest as brief but intensely intimate relationships. And that's because to you, love is meant to feel easy. You're a strong believer in the idea that when the right person comes along, you'll know that something deep down inside will fall into place and everything will make sense. It's kind of like that feeling you get when you just meet someone for the first time and it already feels like you've known them forever. As a sorcerer, you don't hold anything back. You are always your most authentic self. And to some, that can be refreshing. However, it also makes you naive and a little idealistic in your approach, which can affect how you express and receive love. The most significant being that your relationships can often lack the foundation to develop deep connections. Which isn't to say that you don't feel deeply for the other person, just that your feelings are based in raw emotion as opposed to any singular line of reasoning. So if you have a source for a love language, my advice to you is to learn how to build that foundation and to understand that love, whether platonic or romantic, often takes work. Moving on to D&D's Forgotten Middle Child, Rangers are often described as independent to a fault. Often the first or the last line of defense, and the same is true here. If you have a Ranger love language, you express it through your fierce independence, taking a more reactive approach to your relationships, whether platonic or romantic. Your love is quiet and comfortable, often low maintenance in comparison to the other classes, and it can get lonely in a way. But while you aren't one for grand gestures, that doesn't mean that you aren't thinking about the other person. You often express your love through little gifts or heartfelt notes, small non-confrontational ways to let the other person know that you're thinking about them. Your main problem is that despite this, you can often come off as cold and distant, which is why it's important to recognize the walls you put up and learn how to deconstruct them brick by brick. Not all at once, mind you, but gradually over time. As one of the most passionate D&D love languages, barbarians love aggressively, but not abusively. Let me explain. People usually see the term rage and assume barbarians are the type to punch a hole through a wall. But taking their actual class description into account, you start to see the depth and nuance present beneath the surface. Barbarians are protectors and leaders, charging headlong into danger for the sake of others, and the same is true here for people with barbarian love languages. You're the kind of person to advocate for someone when they're not in the room, or to ask for more ketchup. My fries are very dry. The main problem with this, however, is that sometimes you need to take a step back and allow the people you love to care for themselves. Just because you want to speak up for someone doesn't mean that you should speak over them. Oh boy. When it comes to the Bard love language, it is buried in stereotypes and memes. So to get to the core of what makes a Bard's love so appealing, we need to understand that a Bard's talents don't lie in their pelvis, they lie in their ideals. If you have a Bard love language, you are the type to express your affections through grand gestures. In your heart of hearts, you are a hopeless romantic trying to replicate the kind of love that people only dream of. And that isn't to say that you're naive. You know how to navigate a relationship. The issue is finding someone that matches the energy you bring to the table, and it can be kind of tiring to feel like you're the only one putting forth effort. But the thing is, not everyone performs the same way that you do. Having a druid love language is troublesome to people who don't share your beliefs. You value freedom and the ability to explore your options in an emotionally healthy way to figure out what works best for you. However, this can often rub people the wrong way because it doesn't always fit within their narrow worldview. You express your love through your respect for your partner as their own independent person. And while this might be controversial to say, if you have a druid love language, polyamorous or open relationships might appeal to you. This belief simply stems from the idea that love is not meant to be hoarded, and affections can develop naturally with any number of people. It's an idea that deconstructs a lot of what traditional society would have you believe, and that can be often a point of contention or judgment to those who aren't familiar with it. Ultimately though, if you have a druid love language, it's important to protect your peace and vet the people you let in. Fighters are the single greatest class in D&D and nobody can convince me otherwise. People often view fighters as boring or vanilla, but the core of what makes them great is their dedication. Not to you, but to themselves. If you have a fighter love language, you express it by being your best self. You are constantly putting forth effort to improve, and that can be a grounding force to a lot of the other classes. You help others help themselves and take an active role in the lives of the people you love. However, this isn't always the best thing for them, and that's because you're very goal-oriented. Rather than fixing an immediate problem, you have a bigger picture in mind, which can often leave things ignored if they don't serve that greater purpose. But the thing is, sometimes the problem is right in front of you, not 10 years down the line, so it's important to stay present and in the moment. The monk love language is interesting. In-game, monks view adventures as tests for their physical and mental development, singularly driven by a desire to accomplish a greater goal, which is very similar to fighters in a way. Hence, when discussing their individual love languages, it's important to make a distinction between the two. A fighter seeks to improve for themselves, a monk improves in service to a specific end. And the monk love language is the same way. You have an idea of the life you want to live and the love you want to experience and are unflinching in those ideals. You want to find someone who challenges you, who motivates you to improve, and you bring that same energy to your relationships. You express love through antagonizing others, whether it's playful teasing or destroying them in Mario Kart. In either scenario, you want to give them something to strive towards and compete against. However, the issue is sometimes people don't want to be challenged. Shocking, I know. But gentle encouragement can be just as effective in the grand scope of things. Also, stop taking my fucking stars in Mario Party! Finally, we have warlocks. And while I could just say sugar baby and call it a day, it's important to understand what makes a warlock love language so intimate. Having a warlock love language is not to say that you view love as a transactionary measure, but rather centers around the idea that both parties have to bring something to the table for a relationship to flourish. Much in the way that a patron provides power and a warlock provides service. You're a people pleaser, and you often express your love through trust. Both their ability to trust in you and your ability to trust in them. You're usually the one to compromise, but the fact still stands that when you love someone, you are willing to go to hell and back for them. However, the problem then becomes how much of yourself are you willing to give up in service to your relationship? How long until you forget what it was ever like to be alone? A question for another day. But with that, thank you so much for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for next episode where I teach you that the best advice for fixing edgy characters comes from an anime where 13 brothers try really hard not to sleep with their new stepsister. I'm not kidding, send help.